Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's webinar, How to Be an Entrepreneur Without Being a Founder, a fireside chat with Jen Wong, COO of Reddit. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Wendy Maldonado D'Amico, Yale College class of 1993. I'm a director of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. Our discussion this evening is co-sponsored by Yale Gala and Yale Women. Accelerate Yale is a global community of alumni and friends of Yale who are engaged in innovation, tech, and entrepreneurship. Please note that we are being recorded this evening and with all participants muted. Tonight's session will be 1 hour and we will reserve the final 25 minutes for your questions. If you have a question that you would like to submit, please do so via the Q&A button on the bottom bar of your screen. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator and featured speaker for the evening. First, our moderator, Gary Stewart, class of 1996, Yale Law School graduate, class of 1999, is the CEO and founder of Founder Tribes, an app that gamifies founder education and provides access to mentors and fundraising. Until recently, he was the CEO and co-founder of The Nest, a mobile app that could be called Masterclass for Founders. From 2014 to 2019, Gary was the director of Wyra UK, a corporate accelerator backed by Telefonica. From 2010 to 2014, Gary was an associate professor of entrepreneurship at IE Business School in Madrid and CEO of Wyra Spain. He launched his first startup in 2005. Before becoming an entrepreneur, Gary worked as a lawyer in the US, UK, and Spain. He graduated magna cum laude Phi Beta Kappa from Yale College and was the executive editor of the Yale Law Journal at Yale Law School. He is a governor of the University of East London and has been on the power list of the most influential Black people in the UK. He is a member of the leadership teams of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels. And now, our guest for this evening, Jen Wong, class of 1996, is the COO of Reddit. With over 15 years as a renowned executive in the digital media space, Jen brings a wealth of experience and insight to Reddit. Jen first began her career as an entrepreneur, co-founding a children's entertainment startup before joining McKinsey & Company's telecom, media, and technology practice in 2010, Jen brought her leadership to AOL as global head of business operations, where she oversaw major acquisitions of companies like TechCrunch, 5min, and the Huffington Post. She also served as general manager and senior vice president for some of the company's biggest brands. After AOL, Jen became chief business officer at Pop Sugar Inc., where she led the company's day-to-day operations, business, and product engineering while bringing global growth to the company's media entities. In 2015, she became Time Inc.'s president of digital, earning a promotion soon after that to become chief operating officer. At Time, Jen shepherded the company's digital and interactive strategies, operations, consumer marketing, and revenue, streamlining and expanding the business as she oversaw dozens of online media properties like People, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated. Jen, it's an honor for Accelerate Yale to host you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to my friend Gary Stewart to carry on the conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wendy. And I'm super excited to be able to have a chat with Jen Wong, one of my earliest and dearest friends. So first, let's start, Jen. I mean, Wendy just kind of gave us a bit of your bio, but how would you describe yourself in like 1 minute? What's your 1 minute pitch?
Yeah, here's how I describe myself. So like, I think about this in 7 ways. I've actually been asking other people this question. So I'd say I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a child of immigrants, I'm a builder, I'm a leader, I'm a light hoarder, and a very, very practical but eternal optimist. And I love that question because actually, as part of our training, actually our diversity training, one of the questions is, how do you describe yourself in 1 minute in 7 different ways. And what you uncover is just peeling down and down and down. And so, yeah, I like opening with that question.
Well, so my first memory of you actually way back when is like debating against each other, both of us like little nerds with briefcases probably, I forget, in some school, some high school. And then later on we went to Yale together. And I guess in those days we were both presumably straight, both presumably kind of children of immigrants. But I wanted to ask you, what do you remember most about those days at Yale? You know, I remember we were talking recently, you were saying, you know, you kind of felt insecure in some ways. Just tell us a little bit about what those Yale days were like, and did you know you were going to become this kind of COO lady sometime later in the future? Or yeah, just give us a sense of like who you were at that point and who you aspired to become.
Well, I didn't know anything from anything, and I was really intimidated when I got to Yale. It was great to see your face there because I mean you had met when we were 16, and just for all of you know, I lost a debate to Gary, and I got the ugly trophy with the pigeon upside down. As a result. It's kind of a joke trophy. In any case, I went to public school in Long Island, and I had never met people who had gone to private schools in the city or boarding schools, and until getting to Yale. And I was pretty intimidated, I'd say. I think academically, I felt like I went to a good school and I did well, but wow, people were really ahead and much more experienced in life and more mature. So that was, eye-opening for me. And and this is probably, in some ways my greatest strength and maybe also my weakness is I tend to look 2 years out. I can't see farther than that. Like I don't spend a lot of time imagining much more than that. And so I never thought too much about what was I going to be, what kind of work would I like to do, et cetera. I just wasn't oriented that way. And I certainly was not oriented toward business. Most of my family had gone to graduate school, but were kind of academically oriented. So I kind of assumed that was the direction I would go in. I never viewed myself as a business professional until much later on in my career and years later than Yale. So, for me, Yale was just kid in a candy store, really enjoyed the moment, but didn't look past 2 years. Hence, I missed the resume drop off when everyone's applying to jobs. So I had to find it on my own.
Well, that's like really interesting because it's true. I didn't really ever remember you as kind of like the business person. You were doing some math degree or something or the other. I think it was at Stanford or something. And then all of a sudden, all I knew, we were together September 11th. And then next thing I knew, you were at HBS and you came and you were telling me about some startup idea. And at that point, I was kind of like a lawyer. I was like, what's a startup thing? And you were doing something, I think it was called Baby Einstein, if I remember correctly.
We did baby, like kids educational videos. Yeah.
And so what was it about? Why didn't you pursue that idea? Like, how did you then end up at McKinsey? Because you were like in the startup
Yeah.
game and then you
Yeah.
kind of, well, gonna drop that and I'm gonna go to McKinsey, a kind of more traditional route. What was the logic there?
Well, I mean, the great thing about going to business school is that you have a lot of time. And it was an opportunity to explore. And so, I had worked. So after college, I ended up working in like a quantitative field because I was a math major. It just sounded really logical, and I had a lot of loans, and it was just very practical. And that's where I ended up finding a job. But it was not really close to what I wanted to do. Like if you know me, you'll know that I am quantitative, but I mostly enjoy being around creative people and creative ideas, and it just didn't feed that part of me, and it took a while for me to realize that. So what happened was actually I was living in London, and you were there for part of it, and a friend of a friend came to visit and said, we had coffee, and he was like, hey, I gotta go, I'm studying for the GMAT. I was like, well, why are you doing that? Why are you going to business school? And he's like, well, I kind of want to do a career change. And I was like, well, I want to do that. And so I took the GMAT really quickly and went to business school and hit the reset button. And that summer, I didn't get a proper job again through the proper channels. And I ended up moving to California and being an intern at HBO, grossly underpaid, but working in media, which is something that I wanted to do, personally loved. And that's where I got the inspiration to make a video company. And that actually is where I spent my second year of business school, was just spending the time to do that as my independent study. And the deal was, if you get a distribution deal, you know, you get a good grade. And I spent all our time building product and going to New York to cut a deal. And I'd never done that before in my life. And we cut a deal where we actually got paid. And that was my independent study, my taste of, you know, entrepreneurship. But the thing that, you know, the reason why I ended up going to McKinsey after school is because I started shopping for jobs, and I would go and I would look at, oh, you know, sales or marketing role, et cetera. And I was like, yeah, I could do that. Maybe I could do partnerships. Maybe I could do marketing. Everything looked like a possibility. And then I realized I don't know anything. I don't know anything about how businesses run. I'd worked in a quantitative field. Like, it's very different than how a company runs. And so I went to McKinsey because it's one of the best places that you can go to kind of shop and learn each function, learn a lot of industry. I thought I'd be there for a couple of years. I ended up staying there much longer than I expected. You know, like over 5 years. But I learned a lot. It's actually like an incredibly privileged view to peek under the hood of companies and see their culture, see how functions work, see, you know, things that are really inspiring and see things that are really terrifying at the same time, and allow you to compare. And, you know, it's inspiring because a company of a few thousand can get a newspaper or a magazine to your house every week, anywhere in the world. That's pretty astounding in terms of fee. It's terrifying because when you see the inside of companies, sometimes you wonder how that even happens. Sometimes when you see things that are, you know, kind of in a disarray. So it's an education.
And I guess you use that education to then go to kind of one of the iconic companies at that point, AOL. How did you decide to go to AOL? And then how did you all of a sudden get involved in acquiring iconic Web 1.0 or maybe 2.0 startups like Huffington Post and TechCrunch?
It feels like a long time ago, I guess. So Tim Armstrong had got over from Google to be the CEO of AOL. And AOL, you know, for those of you who may not know, like it was a serious turnaround. It's you know, first generation ISP to send all those CDs, you know, and it was the ultimate sign of internet success like 20 years ago. And so this is, you know, I said before, I'm a practical optimist. So when I met Tim, and he, you know, shared his vision for building a digital media business with advertising, you know, to do a turnaround, you have to be an optimist. And I could see it. I could see the possibility of that happening. And, you know, with that, we did a lot of positive things like buying Huffington Post and TechCrunch. And it's pretty exciting to be able to make big moves like that. It's hard though. I will say, like, having done 2 turnarounds, also public company, it is really, really hard work because you are doing kind of cleanup and repair at the same time that you are building for growth. So it's like investors think you're treading water because maybe your top line or whatever, it's flat. But the reality is there's like a part that's going down and a part that's growing really fast to fill the trough. So you're like hustling twice as hard, but all they see is this. And it is really, really hard.
So then after that kind of, you know, treading water, you then kind of went to another startup, Pop Sugar. Like, so what was it that made you decide to go from kind of being on the, you know, more like on the outside looking in, kind of as the investor acquirer, to just being like in the meat and bones of it, kind of with Pop Sugar? What was Pop Sugar? What is Pop Sugar? And tell us a bit about kind of how you decided to then go to a kind of more startup for real culture.
Yeah. Well, you know, this was during the time, you know, like 10 years ago, I think digital media companies, you know, they were sort of like the first generation of blogs. And then, you know, after, you know, kind of the blogging trend, I think people started forming, you know, more digital media brands and websites. And that was sort of the rise of these attackers in the world of digital media, which was pretty exciting, you know. And that's what, you know, that was the part of the strategy at AOL, plus video. And PopSugar was one of the companies that I actually admired at the time and I looked at. We looked at it. I was like, this is a great company. It has 2 things. It has a publishing arm, which is women's lifestyle with advertising and a big audience. And then it's got a shopping search engine that drives leads to apparel retailers. So pretty exciting business. And it's the kind of business that I would have liked to go work for after business school or even after McKinsey, but who I think at the time would not take me because they would not know what to do with me, because I sort of didn't have general management experience. And even when you're a consultant after that, you lack real experience making decisions and doing things. So after having worked at AOL, I actually had that experience. And so I could go work at a growth company. And that's what I wanted to do. I met Brian Sugar and Lisa Sugar. And, that was the first time that I joined a private VC backed company. They're mostly Sequoia backed. Now they're part of Group 9 Media. And, that was an incredible experience because it was very different, right? It's private. That's really nice, very peaceful. It's a pure growth company experience. So you don't worry about what's going down. You're just like up and to the right. What's the slope of the line? You're on the attacker side. So there's like a real gusto and a real sense of mission and purpose that is very, very strong, and culture. And I got the experience of working with founders. In this case, it was a founder couple. There are other co-founders, but at the heart of it, a founder couple. And I learned a lot. Founders have idiosyncrasies. Most of them are good and additive, and actually the culture is built around them. But you have to be okay with that, right? And founders set the culture around, and those idiosyncrasies seep into the culture, and that's part of what makes it interesting. And so you really have to embrace that. And it's very different than working in a big company in a corporate environment culturally. I really loved it. I'm personal friends with them, with Lisa and Brian Sugar, and for me, I learned a lot. I helped grow the business. I ran product and engineering for the first time directly. I hadn't done that, so actually being responsible for shipping things, and it was really fun, even though I lived in New York and flew back and forth.
And then I guess after Pop Sugar, you left to become the president of Time Digital, I guess, and then the COO of Time Inc., which is a more traditional media company. So, up until that point, you had always been kind of like around the startup world, kind of in different kind of guises. But then this was kind of a traditional company. What made you decide to go to a traditional company after all of these startup experiences?
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to. I didn't want to at first. A board member at Time Inc. reached out and kind of convinced me to join because, he kind of painted the idea of what was possible and the investment that was going into it. I also, the other thing that changed my mind was I talked to a friend of mine who is a recruiter, and I said, well, "What do you think?" And he said, "People who know you love you, but not enough people know you, and you haven't operated at scale very often. You've now operated really well at smaller scale, but operating at scale is a thing. It's a skill set, and it's different. And it might be a good opportunity for you to demonstrate that. And by the way, I think you would do a good job at it." And work at the board level, public, large scale. So that kind of seeped in a little bit for me, and did help kind of change my mind. It took me some time to come around, but I saw the opportunity again. The eternal optimist in me, kicked in again, and this was definitely a turnaround situation. But it was print. I was like, print? What? Well, that was a little bit of a shock. I mean, I spent 4 years poking at these companies from an attacker point of view. But I learned a lot, and I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish, which was helping the business grow, helping the audience grow, helping these iconic brands grow, and providing a growth plank for the business. And I learned a lot in terms of operating at scale. And I in the end, I think it was like incredible experience when you, especially if you go through the experience of selling a company at that size. You certainly learn a lot. There is this one voice that sticks in my head. There was one very well-known investor who said to me when I told him I was taking this role, he said, "Oh, don't stay there too long because you may never be able to work at a growth company again." Now, that same investor, when I joined Reddit, sent me a note and said, "Excellent move." But and I thought to myself, well, I think I got the role at Reddit because of my experience here. So net, I think it was the right decision.
Well, then let's jump straight into the Reddit question. And by the way, Time Inc. was sold for $2.8 billion. So that was a kind of good exit. But now at Reddit, what made you attracted to the Reddit role? I guess after you had just been in the traditional, you went back to the startup world again. So you're always kind of like orbiting and kind of entering into the startup world. But what was it about Reddit in particular that really attracted you?
Yeah. Well, Reddit's iconic, right? I mean, at this point now, it's been around for 15 years. I had watched Reddit grow. I'd been a user for a long time. I don't call myself a Redditor, but I was always on Reddit. And, if you work in the world of digital media, your editors are on Reddit all the time, because that's where they're getting ideas for stories and ideas for creative that goes on social. So I was on a break, at this time. And when Reddit reached out, and I met Steve, I got really excited and really inspired. I mean, it's rare that you see a product and a platform like this that has such a massive audience, that's so early in its monetization journey, to become a business, and that just has so much potential in it. Like it's so vast, the opportunities, for Reddit. And the other thing that I loved in my conversation with Steve, who's our co-founder and CEO, is how mission driven the company is. That really resonated for me. Every place I've ever worked, the mission and the product have to resonate with me. Otherwise, I can't work there because I feel like I have to have a very strong intuition for the product and the purpose, even if I'm just driving the business side, which is somewhat separate. It's really important, and it helps me, I think, be better at my job and be more excited about it. If you notice, I've always worked in consumer businesses. Some are B2B to C, but there's always a consumer part to it, and that's just because I think I understand those businesses better. B2B businesses are better businesses overall. But I tend to be attracted to consumer businesses, and I think that makes me better at my job. So in any case, I ended up joining Reddit, getting the opportunity to join Reddit in April 2018. And it's been an incredible couple of years, since then.
So I'm going to ask you now like a real startup-y question. And you're, by the way, on the advisory board of Founder Tribe. So this is a question that like I have to think about all the time. And I'm going to come to you to ask for your help upside of this. But the question is like, how do you grow an audience? Because I guess this is really kind of like I guess there are two big challenges for a startup. You need to kind of like, especially a consumer-facing startup, you need to grow your audience, and then you need to monetize it. So help us understand, after all of these years, kind of in all of these different guises, working with startups to grow their user bases, what's the secret to growing your user base? And how do you do it cheaply when you don't have any money? If you can still remember what that was.
Well, I mean, there are different kinds of audiences, paid and unpaid, right? I mean, those are two very different things, right? I think maybe in your case, you're asking about how to build the customer. I mean, look, I'll tell you, like, there's some tactics, right? So the first is, for good or for bad, like Google SEO keeps giving. Like, it likes real content, it likes real voices. It's still a source of traffic. You got to play the organic hustle game because paid is expensive, but it's there. If you're going to get your word out and build a social following, let's say for your brand around your values and who you are, definitely get your ideas from Reddit. That is what most people do to be successful on social. And I would say, believe it or not, hiring a good PR agency early really can make you look a lot bigger than you are in real life and plant you in the right places. I do think that makes a really big difference. But my philosophy, if you're trying to get especially paid customers, is to get your product in the hands of real people who then use it, even if it's free, to get real experience out there. And so if you have a good product, like, they will become your advocates. This is what I see on Reddit all the time, is incredibly like rabid people who become fans, who just become advocates. And more, I think that I see the power of just allowing that to flow, kind of buoy, your success and interest in your product. Those are the things that I kind of spring to mind for me.
No, awesome. And then the flip side is, as you said, sometimes you can kind of really grow a user base by offering it for free, but then I guess at some point you need to think about how to make some money. And as you
Yeah.
said, maybe Reddit is kind of still really early in its kind of monetization journey. So tell us a little bit, like, now that you're at this company with like the huge user base, but still monetizing it, what are the things that startups should be thinking about in terms of how to monetize users, if you're lucky enough to kind of get a really loyal base, but they're not paying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, our Reddit's a specific type of business, right? It's philosophically, we want to maintain our mission and values, part of which is to be open and anonymous and give users control over privacy and enable them to have these, amazing conversations. And so, our strategy is scale, and then we have an advertising business around it. And in building that business, all of the principles that we have as a company and as a platform are supported and reflected in our advertising product. So that is like, we are extremely clear about our mission and values, both in how we monetize and our mission. So our mission is to bring community and belonging to the world. What is our advertising business? It is the fuel for our mission. What are our values? Very clear. We believe in transparency. We believe in user control of data. We believe in allowing people to be anonymous, to have the conversations, right? All of those things are ultimately reflected and respected in our advertising product. So I think that if you think about monetization, what you want is not to create friction in your experience by too much friction in your experience with the monetization, but to try to enhance it as much as possible. I mean, that's certainly been our philosophy in our platform. It's it's different in SaaS, where you pay out of the gate, obviously.
And then I guess going to this idea about transparency and openness, like, there's been a lot of controversy recently about social media and organizing insurrections or whatever, using social media, and kind of then the banning of Trump or whatever from different platforms. Where do you guys fall on all of this? And I guess there's also now this thing about Reddit traders or Reddit, whatever. How do you kind of make sure that you're kind of living up to your values, but at the same time moderating conversations and behavior in a way that is not antithetical to other values?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, every platform is different, and takes a different approach. For us, we have a system of layered moderation and communities, which is how all of Reddit's structured. And we didn't ban the president. We didn't ban Donald Trump. We have communities of supporters of Trump and who are politically active. So it's different. Our goal is, we want to foster open conversation, right? And that's really important. And one of our values is remember the human. So core to conversation is dignity and integrity and respect. And we have rules. I mean, we have policies, very, very clear policies that we enforce. Our community also helps us enforce, that keep the conversation healthy. So, for example, to the extent that hateful content, hurts others from freely participating on Reddit, we have clear policies against that. Inciting violence, bullying, harassment. That's rule number 1 in our content policy. Those things are not allowed. So, we have those policies, we enforce them. We have a Reddit that's a little bit different, is we kind of share the burden of moderation with our community. And the way this is done is that every community has its own set of policies, that they can make their rules. And then they have moderators who help enforce those rules. And that's really unique to them because it's about what they need to have the conversations that they want in their community. So it allows for more nuance and context. And that's really unique to Reddit. And, the moderators and us and the community who gets to vote up content, vote down bad content, basically all work together in a system to make sure that the good content goes to the top, and the bad content goes to the bottom. And so all of that is kind of how the system works. And I'd say if you look at Reddit over the last maybe 6 months during the election was actually very quiet on Reddit. And it was very simple discussion. And I think that's because we have taken action against groups that were more unruly on the platform years ago. And so the election was actually very quiet for us. And even early January with the riots was also quiet on the platform.
All right, awesome. And then I guess going back to kind of like, your original journey, you were like, okay, you were at Harvard Business School, baby Einstein or whatever the product was called, I can't remember. And then you said, I don't really have like the experience, so I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get it. Now you have all this experience, you've done all these amazing things. Do you think that you would ever launch a startup yourself? Why or why not?
I don't think so. And now having seen, worked with founders, spent a lot of time around entrepreneurs, I think I'm not an entrepreneur. I think I'm very entrepreneurial. I think I'm not an entrepreneur. And I think, and that's okay. I think I've, I think for a while I almost like beat myself up about that. Like, why not? What is it? Because you're scared? Because you won't take the risk? Like, what is it about that? And I think it's just not my sweet spot. It's not the work that gets me most excited. I'm very entrepreneurial. So I would say like I'm a builder at heart. But I'm specifically like the dirt path to a gravel road person. I'm not the tree clearing person. And that's okay. It took a while to, I think, like reconcile that with myself, but um that's who I am. And it's because that's partially not my risk profile. Like I like to believe in really big ideas and be a part of building them, but I'm probably less willing to bet my actual life on it. Just something I'm aware of for myself. I think my skill set being hopped between big companies and small companies really kicks in when you're trying to build something that has a little more structure and a little more process, and you can benefit from that experience. Yeah, so I love being entrepreneurial. I think you'll find that I'm really aggressive, have that entrepreneurial spirit, have that attacker, kind of mindset, but probably stop short of being the one to start it all.
And so if you are that person that says, okay, my risk profile is not to bet at all, but I would love being around those sorts of people as you have been your entire
Yeah.
career, much. How do you find the right project?
Well, I think, one thing to do is you can go as early as as early stage as your risk profile will allow you to learn, right? I mean, that's one thing you can do is just say, okay, well, how early can I go, with the risk profile that I have, in terms of a company that I can work at, what stage? And I think you can stepwise into it. I mean, for example, if your risk profile is like, okay, I just want to toe dip into this, okay, be an entrepreneur. That's a pretty safe entrepreneurial route. It's not the same, it's a compromise, but it's a step in that direction. Then you can start progressively going into, okay, this growth stage, illiquid. No, this is really like now Series B. Okay, I'm going all the way down. Do I go to a 100-person company? Do I go to a 50-person company with some semblance of an MVP, but not that many users? I think those are the questions that you can explore and start pushing your way down to see what you can, what's right for you. I mean, I I'd forgotten, like after working at a company that was a couple thousand people, I'll be honest, when I got to Reddit, it was like 200 and change. I'd forgotten what a company that was 200 and change was like. When I got to Pop Sugar, I think it was 100 and something. I just forgot over the years. And I was like, okay, now I remember. Um, and I like it. I like the stage, I think, that we're in last year to this year going forward, probably even more. But you know, it's it. I would just say try to push as much as as much as you can, and test it out.
All right, and so in the last like 8 or so minutes, because I know Wendy's going to pop on soon, I want to go into the diversity question because I mean, obviously,
Hmm.
you're Asian American, a woman, as you said, a mother, gay. How did you kind of climb all of these corporate worlds? Silicon Valley is supposed to be this big bro culture. How did you do it without falling off the glass cliff or hitting a glass ceiling?
Well, I think the path by choosing to be entrepreneurial versus an entrepreneur, in some ways, it's easier, because being an entrepreneur, like I do have to help raise capital now, but like, as an entrepreneur, that is a huge part of your job. And I think that is where some of the friction is getting the capital when you're different, when you're a woman, when you're a person of color, like that, getting capital, et cetera, is just, it's different. And that's proven out in all the research. Um, for me, I think I'm a real straight talker. Uh, I definitely tell it like it is. And I I think that all of the dimensions of who I am filter into my perspective for sure, which I think I like to bring to the table, but in a pretty helpful but disarming way, is what I would say. So you'll often hear from me. I'm going to be vulnerable at this moment and share something that you may or may not appreciate, but I'm going to say it. So that's one way that I think that's kind of worked for me. I think overall, I've never, from a mindset perspective, I've never had um, limitations in my mind, and and maybe this is like a something that I am not that conscious of, and should be more conscious of, which is like what other people think of me. Like I'm aware of it. Like I care about feedback, et cetera, obviously, but I don't let it drive me, um, and and I think that's actually a good thing, because in the moments when I've had consciousness about it, sometimes it hasn't been that good. So, for example, when I was working at McKinsey, there are times when I was like the project manager and the team is actually mine, and the client comes in and they'll be like, "Hey, can somebody get some water?" And they're like looking at me to go get the water, and I'm like, "Not me. It's not me. I'm not getting the printouts and I'm not getting the water, right?" So, um, it's better for me almost not to know. um, yeah.
And then you've mentioned that, the statistics are pretty dire. I think it's like women-led companies get like 2% of the funding and Black founders get like 1%. If you didn't go to Harvard or Stanford, probably like, it's also kind of a disadvantage. So if you were President Biden, who said that he kind of really wants to change this, what would the 2 or 3 concrete steps that you would take be to really change this dynamic of lack of diversity in tech, and particularly in terms of funding of tech startups?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple different things. I mean, one, so funding is one issue, but I think that's only part of the issue. Um, I think that the and I think there are mechanisms for. I think there are ways to put funding into more diverse hands, and I think that is actually in some ways, from a government perspective, I think something that you can facilitate, because assuming you have funds, but you can facilitate. I think the harder part for me is when you look at the boards and the leadership of companies. That's really where I think um, there's there's not enough diversity. And what happens with that is then you just don't have guidance and experience at the table that I think helps these companies develop it, with that additional perspective. And then as a result, the companies, they grow, but they have a harder time recruiting talent. It kind of builds on itself. So I like to start at the top. I think I really believe in board diversification and executive diversification, because that provides inspiration, in a lot of cases, education, and that's necessary in order to pull, the workforce through at all levels. I think the second is like transparency. So I think transparency is really powerful. So if if companies are more transparent about what their populations look like, I think that will make a difference, both internally to their companies to understand the task at hand, as well as just publicly for people to make decisions about, joining the company. And then I think the other piece is, from a government standpoint, is I think we need to spread out the workforce talent. Like, we have to develop pockets of talent in areas outside of like New York and Silicon Valley. There's a lot of great talent out there. There's great schools. There's great talent all over the country. Some has more access than others, but it's just too congested. And you'll see that in our workforce strategy as well. I think SF in New York are beyond, I'd say.
Well, last question, because I see Wendy's back, which is, if you were a founder listening to you and the person saying, well, I want to know how I can kind of create the next Reddit, the next Pop Sugar, the next TechCrunch, next Huffington Post. You've seen all these different companies from the inside. What are the kind of 2 or 3 key lessons that someone that really wants to build a huge company should be taking into account from the beginning?
I'll give advice for maybe for the leadership, just to think about, if you reflect on yourself as a leader. I think that one is like recruiting the best people, like great people, holding an incredibly high bar for that. And not just because they have great content knowledge, but because they really, really believe in your mission and values. That is going to propel you so far, further than you think. The second is, I think, having real clarity in not only the strategy, but like the values and the, obviously in the mission of the company, is the responsibility of the founder. And if that's big, that will help guide the company to think really big about what it wants to build. And that's what you want. You want that big vision and aspiration, and you want the great talent lined up behind it. And the third is, I think, for this is for the founder themselves, is, your day can get eaten up with things that are incredibly reactive and feel urgent in that moment. But what's really important is that you spend time on the big things that are important but not urgent. And that's just like the personal struggle, I think, of being a founder in an early stage company or a leader at early stage companies. Like, how do you make sure that you stay on the things that are important but not urgent, tugging at you every day, but that you have to force yourself to focus on, that can be transformative for your business or your product. So I'd say those 3 things.
Awesome. Well, with that, I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Awesome. Thank you very much, you guys. Some great questions coming in from our audience. So I'm just going to pick and choose here. We probably will not get to all of the questions, so just be prepared. And that's an admonishment for the audience than for you, Jen. So here's a question from Michael. He says, having worked in digital publishing and watching it morph over the past decade plus, what are your thoughts about its future and sustainability?
That's a Good question. It is a tough business. I think everybody hoped that digital advertising would be enough to support, media, and it's not. It's just not. And I think, it's like Web 1.0 had this promise of being open and free. And to be free, you had to have ads. And I think that promise, unfortunately, made a lot of media properties very tentative about charging because of this idea of like free and open. I think that what needs to happen, and you're starting to see this happen, is more payment. And the more likely case is that what was a somewhat consolidated industry is going to continue to fragment, and that you will be able to subscribe, if you think about Substack or, or even following somebody on Medium, like you will be able to follow in a more narrow band sense, a specific, writer or person or perspective. And maybe that'll get bundled up again, and that'll kind of look like almost like a mini magazine that's bundled. But I do think it's going to be pretty, and have to be pretty subscription and payment driven. I hope that world, continues to be able to self-support itself. I do think there's going to be a handful that will do well with it, just advertising, because they have the scale. You really, really need the scale. And for those that don't have the scale, it's going to be subscription, and you'll have a lot of choices.
Thank you. I have a question here from Richard. What practices and structures from enterprise companies do you find are the most helpful for smaller companies, and vice versa?
I'm going to say enterprise, meaning large companies.
I think he means, I'm guessing here. I'm thinking he means larger companies. You've worked in large companies and small companies. So what do you think are some of the things that maybe smaller companies could adopt from larger companies and vice versa?
Yeah. So large, a lot of people, the trend now is, I think, to want to work for small companies. Like everyone I meet is like, I want to work for a small company, et cetera. And I've even heard from big companies, hey, it's having a harder time recruiting. But there's a lot that you can learn just personally working at a big company versus a small company, and port that knowledge. So the first thing is, big companies, they know how to operate at scale. Like they can use structure and process in a way that is extremely effective. And it's essential to the way that and that includes like, how do they measure performance, and how do they talk about it, and how do they make sure that everybody knows about it? I mean, there's machines and the ability to do this. And that's really effective, because as your company starts to scale, the things that you're going to be rebuilding, spend most of your time rebuilding, is structure and process. You're going to be changing your org and changing your processes all the time. The second is, people who work in large companies, a lot of them have incredibly rich experience, like very deep knowledge of a specific area. And often at early stage companies, you have like fire starter personalities, but might not have specific content experience, right? So you're hiring for somebody who can like do 5 jobs or 6 jobs. Maybe they're not an expert in any one, but you have 6 jobs for them to do. That's very different than somebody who's like, I really know how to do this very well. And you could learn a lot from those people. So it's good to have them within your network, because they can go very, very deep. And the third is, I think large companies, most of them, they think globally naturally, because they operate at that scale. And I think sometimes startup companies think pretty narrowly, just because it's daunting to think globally. But that's something that is usually a really big arc for a company, culturally, strategically, etc.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I have a question here from an audience member, and they say, as I think about rebranding and making a career change in the entrepreneurial startup space at an older age, do you think that's a real barrier? Do you see any trends there, Jen? Is everybody, super young and ready to burn the midnight oil?
I think it is an industry that leans young. For example, I think at Reddit, I'm probably one of the 5 older people. I don't know, it's my guess. The leadership team tends to be older. It is an industry that leans younger. Depending on what segment you work in, though, I think it makes a difference. So, for example, I work at a brand and a company that is like basically the sweet spot is serving, what we call like emerging adults, right? People who are discovering themselves and wanting to learn. And so being in the mindset of a younger audience is valuable, and that obviously attracts younger employees as well. They happen to be users of the platform. But now what you're seeing is, I think, a lot of growth companies, they're attackers of very mature industries. And there's a great advantage for somebody who has more experience, who's older, to join those companies. That's what I was saying before about people who worked at large companies, have a lot of experience. So if you're an insurance attacker, like there are people who really, really know insurance, and it is complicated. If you're working a fintech, there are people who really know financial services industries and know how to deal with a regulated environment. That's really great, right? So if you think about your skill set, you may be older in terms of your professional skill set. I think there is a way to match into industry by leveraging that skill set. That all said, I will say that the technology industry does skew young for sure in terms of its teams.
Okay.
And I think could be better about accessing older talent and making it a more welcoming and, an obvious and welcoming in the sense that like making clear that it is an opportunity to be a part of these companies.
Here's a question. Does Reddit consider itself a media platform? And how would you like to see Section 230 changed? And for those of us who don't know what Section 230 is, like me, could you explain what that is?
Sure. Yeah, so we view ourselves as a community platform. And obviously, Section 230 is really important. It's basically, was passed by Congress, and it is what allows platforms to be open, because the content that flows through the platform, because we're not media companies, we are not, responsible for the content that goes to our platform. We obviously moderate it. We care about being safe and healthy, but ultimately it is an open discussion platform. And I think Section 230 is one of the most powerful pieces of legislation that have happened. You would argue that that is how the internet was created, right? The promise of the free and open conversation is because of Section 230, and you get enormous benefits from it. I mean, you think about the things that happen on Reddit. I mean, people can talk openly, they're anonymous on Reddit, about really deeply personal things, everything from going through a divorce, going through cancer, worrying about things related to their child. Like they can have all of these really important open conversations, that are really private because of, Section 230. And, I think it's kind of the foundation of the internet and how people use the internet.
So I have another question here from an entrepreneur. What do you think are effective ways to build and grow good communities of users? And how do you think of business models? Is it better to keep a product free and grow the users first, or to charge users and have revenue from the beginning?
Well, I think it depends what your product is, but I would say, as I said earlier, to beware of being free, to be free for too long, so that you don't train people to be willing to pay for your service. What I said before is I think it's good to get product in the hands of customers. So it's good to have some moment where, you can you're just trying to get experience, right? You just want to know what people think, but you can have a paid product and still put free product in the hands of people. But free means it has to be supported by something. in that case, it's often been advertising, and advertising is a model that works at scale. Most businesses do not have massive scale. If you don't have massive scale, then you probably should have some sort of payment exchange.
Got it. Okay. We have time for one more question, and I'm going to take the most recent question that came in. Let's see here. This person is I guess a 2000, she's a recent MBA and a female minority founder and was at McKinsey before Yale. For an early stage startup, how do you reconcile your suggestion of having a diverse executive team with securing funding? Do you have any suggestions for who or how to bring others onto the founding team to attract capital?
Trying to understand. So the question is about
I believe that what
diversifying.
she's asking, if I didn't mean to cut you off, Jen. I believe that what she's asking is, her concern is that if her team if she's trying to raise money for her startup, but maybe her team doesn't look like, I don't know, the typical young white bros from Silicon Valley. So she's encountering these issues where she's encountering difficulty in raising the money that she needs for a startup because she doesn't look like your typical startup founder. So do you have any suggestions for her on how she could maybe, I don't know, crack the code on that? And hopefully I reconfigured your question, Betty, in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Gary, you can weigh in on this one as well. I mean, I think, number one, having allies is awesome. So building networks wherever you can, to have, insider allies can help bridge that. And I think it doesn't necessarily have to be, I think what's important, like if you think about what's successful to get to success in fundraising, I think it's about, in a lot of cases, like the right pitch and the right understanding of how to actually negotiate it. Like so much of it is about who how you present your idea, and they're investing in you personally, right? And so you're trying to create a bridge between who you are as a person and your vision and the investor. And the more you can find somebody who's an ally who can help you understand how to bridge that, and tell that story, I think that can be really helpful in helping that, because it's to make sure that everything is, there's nothing sort of lost in translation. I don't, and allies I think can help. From a founding team perspective, I think your founding team is your founding team. I wouldn't change it for funding purposes. Okay. It's what makes you who you are.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Jen. Okay, so you guys, I'm so sorry, but we're gonna have to wrap it up here. Hold on, let me pull up my notes here so that I make sense as I close things out with Jen here today. Hold on just a second, you guys. Okay, so Jen, I just wanted to thank you very much for joining the Accelerate Yale community this evening. Gary, thank you for your expert moderation as always. And we wanted to thank our audience for participating tonight. We also wanted to thank Yale Gala and Yale Women for co-sponsoring tonight's event, and the Yale Alumni Association shared interest groups for making this event possible. A recording of this evening's webinar will be posted on the Accelerate Yale LinkedIn page and Facebook page and our YouTube channels by the end of the week. And our next event will be on February 9th at 8 p.m. with Jason Gus of Octane and Matt Levinson of FinTech Collective, who will talk about trends in FinTech. And finally, our inaugural pitch off will be held on February 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern. Jen will be one of our judges that night. We had 69 submissions for our inaugural pitch off, and we only have 5 final spots. So it's been crazy. We've been going through all these incredible ventures, and we've got to winnow them down, and they're under review right now. So we will announce audience registration for that February 23rd pitch off very soon. So keep your eye out for that. And we will announce the final 5 for that competition in mid-February. So just check the Yale Angels page for more information, and we'll be posting on our social media as well. So with that, I just want to thank again everyone for joining us. And Jen, it was a privilege to have you here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, Gary.
All right. Thanks, Gary, for inviting Jen. Okay, bye
See you
everybody.
later. Bye.
See you later.